A black child was taken from his home at midnight and hung in broad daylight while a crowd cheered. No one was punished. No one even spoke his name again. What kind of town calls that justice? This isn't just a story, it's a wound we're still bleeding from. Elijah Carter was 12 years old. The summer, the world decided he was guilty. He had a sketchbook made of brown wrapping paper his mother brought home from the white folks' house where she worked. Most days, you'd find him under the old magnolia tree in the front yard, barefoot, chalk dust on his fingers, drawing birds he'd never seen but imagined anyway, great hawks with flame-tipped wings, tiny wrens with crowns, creatures too free to stay in a place like this. It was Mississippi, 1912. The sun came down like punishment, and the air tasted of red clay and old pain. The town didn't have a name worth remembering, just another cluster of wood-planked stores, dusty porches, and white churches with tall steeples and silent bells. But it was loud in its own way, loud with the rules no one wrote but everyone knew, loud with looks, with lines, with signs that said white only, with silence that screamed. Elijah didn't talk much, but he smiled often. He was the kind of kid who gave away his drawings to neighbors and asked questions about stars, the kind of kid who didn't understand why he couldn't drink from the same fountain as the boy in suspenders who spat near his shoes. He still believed the world was mostly good, or at least fixable. His mama, Sarah Carter, was a tall, proud woman with a spine straighter than most men in town. She worked 6 days a week cooking and cleaning for the Larkins, a white family who lived in a house big enough to echo. Every morning before she left, she'd kneel beside Elijah, brush his curls back with calloused fingers, and whisper, "Don't go where you don't belong, baby. Promise me." Elijah always promised. Then he'd go right back under the magnolia tree and draw the things no one could take from him. But even birds can't fly forever. The sheriff's office sat crooked on Main Street, next to the post office and across from the hardware store. Sheriff Dugan liked things in order. That meant black folks walked on the side street, used the back door, kept their eyes low, and never questioned the price of a bushel of corn or a broken window that just happened to get fixed last. Dugan didn't have to shout. His badge spoke loud enough. And then there was the bakery. It stood on the corner like a forgotten chapel, its windows fogged with sugar dust and sweat. Owned by the Wilkes family, staunchly white, proudly Southern, it served warm bread, molasses pies, and rules thicker than their gravy. One rule above all: if you weren't white, you waited outside. Elijah passed that bakery every day, not because he wanted to, but because it stood between the dirt path to school and the creek where he washed his feet before heading home. He'd glance inside, see the pies, the glass jars filled with lemon drops and peppermint sticks, and sometimes sketch what he imagined they tasted like. On July 10th, 1912, something changed. That morning, a cherry pie went missing from the bakery's front shelf. No broken glass, no forced lock, just gone. No one saw a thing, no one heard a thing. But Mrs. Wilkes swore she'd seen a colored boy with wild hair near the store window that day. And just like that, the whispers began. Little Carter boy been hanging around too much. He's always watching, always drawn out like he's planning something. I don't trust no quiet ones. Elijah never knew his name was already circling like vultures. Back under the magnolia tree, he drew a bird in chains, a blue jay tangled in barbed wire, and didn't know why his hands trembled while sketching. His mama came home late that evening, tired, holding a half-wrapped loaf of bread. The Larkins gave her out of pity. She kissed the top of his head and sat beside him, their shoulders touching in silence. "Promise me you'll stay close tomorrow," she said, voice soft but urgent. Elijah nodded. But the wind shifted that night, and the town had already made its promise. It would not let him fly. The sun rose angry the next morning. It peeled across the rooftops and splashed light onto the dusty windows of Wilkes' bakery, like it had something to prove. Heat rolled in early, thick, syrupy heat that stuck to your skin and filled your lungs with the weight of something waiting to happen. Inside the bakery, Mrs. Wilkes stood with her arms crossed, staring down at the empty space on the wooden shelf where the cherry pie should have been. Her apron was still stained with flour, her cheeks red from both oven heat and something meaner. "I know what I saw," she snapped, before anyone even asked. "That Carter boy was staring through the glass just yesterday, standing too close." Mr. Wilkes, tall and wiry with a permanent scowl, didn't need much more. He'd already decided what happened. No lock broken, no signs of forced entry. That didn't matter. What mattered was who looked guilty and who didn't belong. "He's always out there," Mr. Wilkes muttered, "doodlin', watchin'. Don't look right." By noon, the word had slithered through the streets of the town like a snake looking for warmth. "Elijah Carter stole a pie," they said. No one saw him do it. No one asked if maybe a customer forgot to pay, or maybe a raccoon or a stray dog or a gust of wind had knocked the shelf. Logic wasn't needed. The story made sense, and worse, it felt right to the people who already believed boys like Elijah were capable of anything, even if they were only 12. By mid-afternoon, the rumor became a certainty. Miss S. Jenkins, who taught Sunday school, told her neighbor at the well, "I always knew there was something off about that child, too quiet, and always staring at the sky like he's better than us." At the general store, old man Beechwood spat into the dirt and said, "Used to be a time when kids like that knew their place." And at the sheriff's office, Sheriff Dugan leaned back in his chair, chewing tobacco, eyes half closed as one of his deputies repeated the gossip. Dugan didn't ask for proof. He didn't need it. "Go pay the Carters a visit," he said, like he was ordering lunch. "Make sure they know we don't take kindly to thieves." Meanwhile, Elijah was sitting beneath the magnolia tree again, trying to draw a mockingbird mid-flight. But the lines wouldn't come out right. His hand felt unsure. The world around him, somehow, off balance. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't see the way the townspeople slowed their steps as they passed his house. He didn't feel the new weight in the air, thick with suspicion and something darker. But his mama did. Sarah Carter felt it in her bones, the way mothers feel storms before the first crack of thunder. She saw the way folks at the Larkins' house looked at her differently that day. No smiles, no pleasantries, just a cold silence and a purse of the lips. On her way home, she passed Ms. S. Wilkes standing on the porch of the bakery, arms crossed, face like stone. Their eyes met, and Sarah swore she saw something smug behind that sour expression, like a verdict had already been reached. That night, at dinner, Sarah sat across from Elijah, barely touching her food. She watched her son quietly chew, the soft clink of his spoon against the bowl. The only sound in the room. "Elijah," she said gently, "you didn't take anything from nobody today, did you?" He looked up, confused. "No, ma'am." "You didn't go near the bakery?" "I passed by, but I didn't go inside, I swear." She nodded slowly, but the tightness in her chest didn't ease. "I believe you, baby," she whispered, "but I need you to stay home tomorrow. Please, stay close. Don't go nowhere. Did something happen?" Sarah hesitated, then reached across the table and held his hand. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I don't trust the way the wind's blowing." The next day, Elijah stayed home. He sat by the window, watching the dirt road, sketching shadows more than shapes, now branches curling like claws, clouds that looked like fists. He didn't know what they meant, but his pencil moved like it did. And then, just before dusk, a horse trotted into view. Behind it, a man in uniform, Sheriff Dugan. Elijah froze. Sarah stepped out onto the porch before the sheriff could knock. "Evenin', Sheriff," she said, voice calm but firm. Dugan took off his hat, but there was no kindness in the gesture. "Miss S. Carter," he said, "got a few questions for your boy. You mind?" "I do," she said quickly. "He ain't done nothing, and I know why you here," Dugan smirked. "Well now, that ain't up to you to decide, is it?" Behind Sarah, Elijah watched from the doorway, eyes wide. "Sir, one didn't do anything," he said. "I didn't take no pie." Dugan turned his eyes to the boy and stared for a long time. "I reckon we'll let the town decide that." And then, without another word, he turned and rode away. But his message had landed. The town would decide. It always did. And Elijah Carter was already guilty. The wind died after midnight. It left the town coated in a kind of stillness that felt intentional, like the earth was holding its breath. No crickets, no owls, no breeze through the trees, Just silence, thick and waiting, like the hush before a gunshot. Inside the Carter house, the kerosene lamp burned low. Sarah lay on the small cot beside Elijah's bed, not sleeping, just listening. Her eyes, wide open in the dark, flicked toward every creak in the wood. She could feel it. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was knowledge. A mother always knows when the world is about to take something from her. Elijah stirred beside her, rolling onto his back, mumbling in his sleep. "I drew a crow today," he whispered, but it wouldn't fly. Sarah brushed his curls off his forehead and swallowed back the rising panic. Her hands trembled, but she stayed still. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to run, to pack what she could and disappear into the trees. But she knew better. There was nowhere to run, not when the ones hunting you owned the roads. Then came the knock. 3 quick thuds on the door, sharp, bone-deep knocks. Not hesitant, not polite. Sarah sat up instantly, her breath caught mid-throat. "Elijah," she whispered, "wake up, baby. Wake up now." The boy opened his eyes, blinking in the low light. "Mama?" The knock came again, harder this time. Sarah pulled him close. "Don't speak, just stay behind me." She rose, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands, and walked slowly toward the door. Every step felt like a mile. From outside, a voice called out, "Sarah Carter, open up. We need the boy." It was Sheriff Dugan, but she could hear others, 2 boots shuffling, whispers, the unmistakable sound of rope being handled. Her hand hovered over the latch. "I won't open this door," she said. "He ain't done nothing." There was a pause. Then Dugan's voice again, colder now. "Sarah, open this door, or we'll come in anyway. You know we will." She looked over her shoulder at Elijah. His lips quivered, eyes locked on hers like a lifeline. She turned back to the door. "You'll have to break it, then." She stepped away, drew Elijah behind her. Moments later, the door cracked open with a loud crack as a boot splintered the frame. The lantern swayed on its hook, casting wild shadows across the room. 3 men entered. Dugan first, rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. 2 others followed, faces hidden beneath cloth sacks, eyes dark holes of cowardice. "Don't do this," Sarah begged, voice trembling but fierce. "He's just a boy." Dugan didn't even look at her. He stared at Elijah, who stood frozen, hands clenched at his sides. "You coming with us," he said. "There's questions need answering. You'll be back by morning." It was a lie, of course. But even at 12, Elijah knew that. "No." Sarah stepped in front of him. "You'll have to go through me." Dugan sighed, as if tired of the performance. "You really want to do this the hard way?" One of the masked men stepped forward and shoved her hard. She hit the floor with a grunt, elbow slamming against the wood. Elijah ran to her. "Mama!" Before he could help her up, 2 sets of arms grabbed him, rough hands on his shoulders, pulling him back. "No, no," Sarah screamed. "That's my son. Please." Elijah kicked and struggled, but the rope came fast around his wrists, then his ankles. Dugan crouched next to Sarah, looked her in the eye. "You should have taught him not to steal," he said flatly. Sarah spat at his feet. "God sees you," she hissed, "even if nobody else does." But Dugan had already turned away. They dragged Elijah out into the night. Outside, the wagon waited, wheels creaking as it shifted in place. Torches flickered. The group had grown maybe 8, maybe 10 men. All white, all angry, some drunk, all silent. Elijah's breath came in short bursts. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would crack his chest open. "Mama!" he cried, one last time. Sarah burst out onto the porch, barefoot, robe flapping around her. She ran after them, but someone held her back, one of the neighbors, silent as ever, gripping her arms like iron. "Let me go," she screamed. "That's my baby. Let him go." The wagon pulled away. The last thing Elijah saw before the trees swallowed the road was his mother on her knees, hands reaching up to a sky that didn't answer. They took him to the edge of town where the woods met the fields. There stood a massive oak tree, its limbs twisted like claws. Folks called it the hanging tree, but only in whispers. Elijah's feet scraped the dirt as they hauled him off the wagon. He didn't fight anymore. There was nothing left to fight. The world had shrunk to this one moment. The tree, the rope, the eyes that refused to meet his. One man spoke. "We do this fast. Quiet. He won't feel a thing." Elijah turned to look at him, "Yes, I will," he said. His voice didn't shake. "I feel everything." There was a pause, a flicker, maybe of guilt, maybe of memory, but it passed. They threw the rope over the branch. They didn't ask him for a last word. They didn't pray. They just pulled, and the sky stayed silent. Back at home, Sarah lay face down in the dirt, sobbing into the earth. Her screams tore through the night, louder than thunder, but no one opened their windows. No one lit a lamp. No one came. The wind returned after it was over, a small breeze rustling through the magnolia leaves, brushing across Elijah's unfinished sketch still lying by the window. A bird, wings outstretched, mid-flight, but headless. By morning, the sky had turned a cruel shade of blue. Not the soft blue that cradles springtime or warms a summer's field, but a sharp, unfeeling blue, clear, cloudless, and brutally indifferent. The kind of sky that watches everything but says nothing. They brought Elijah's body into town at sunrise. He was tied upright in the back of a wagon, his small frame limp, his eyes closed but not at peace. The rope still hung from his neck, swaying slightly with each bump in the road, like some obscene pendulum ticking away at what little was left of decency. And the town gathered. They came in their Sunday best, men in brimmed hats and freshly pressed suspenders, women with hand fans and parasols, children in polished shoes and curious eyes, as if attending a parade, as if what they were about to see was something holy. By 8:00 a.m., the town square was full. No one called it what it was. They never did. They called it a lesson, or a warning, or a settling of matters, but not murder, never murder. The tree in the center of town had been chosen days ago. It was a sycamore tall, proud, and conveniently centered between the general store and the town hall. Someone had even cleared the brush around its base, like preparing a stage. Sheriff Dugan stood nearby, arms crossed, boots polished. His badge gleamed in the morning light. His face betrayed no emotion. Next to him, a photographer fiddled with a tripod, adjusting his lens, brushing dust from the plate glass. A line had already begun to form. Folks eager to purchase a photograph, a keepsake, proof that they had been there, to witness justice. Miss S. Wilkes arrived with her husband, clutching her purse like it held the 10 Commandments. She didn't look at the boy, only at the rope. She nodded slightly. The accusation had found its ending. The wagon creaked to a stop. 2 men climbed up, unfastened Elijah's body, and positioned him beneath the sycamore. The rope was threaded once more over a thick branch. They tightened it. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. This was ceremony, and the town had done it before. Elijah's head lolled slightly to the side, his neck bruised, his lip bloodied, but his hands were still stained with a faint smudge of charcoal. The last drawing he touched clung to his pocket, half folded, a bird with one wing extended, the other bent behind its back. Someone in the crowd laughed. A boy, no older than Elijah, pointed. "He looks smaller than I thought," he said. His father ruffled his hair and replied, "They all do when they hang." No one stopped him. No one shushed the boy. Because that, too, was part of the ritual, teaching the next generation not to flinch. A woman handed out lemonade from a tin cooler. Someone passed biscuits wrapped in cloth napkins. A vendor sold penny candy to the children. And then, as if on cue, the rope was pulled tight. Elijah's body jerked upward awkwardly, violently. A collective breath rippled through the crowd. Some gasped. Others clapped. A few turned away, pretending to care. But no one left. No one said, "This is wrong." The photographer stepped forward. "Clear the view," he said. "Back up now." He adjusted the lens, framed the shot carefully. He wanted the tree, the rope, the crowd, especially the children. History, he told himself. A record of law and order. The flash popped. A moment later, someone passed around a clipboard. "Sign your name if you want a copy mailed," they said. By noon, orders had reached 50. Sarah Carter wasn't there. She had been locked inside her own home by 2 deputies, told to stay put for her own safety. But she didn't scream, not anymore. She sat by the window, staring out at the road that led to town, clutching the last sketch Elijah had drawn. She ran her fingers along the page, gently, over the lines he had traced with hope. The bird was unfinished, like him, like everything. When they finally took Elijah's body down, they didn't bring him home. They buried him on the outskirts of the Black Cemetery, near the fence, far from the respectable dead. There was no preacher, no prayer, just a hastily dug hole and the whisper of soil hitting skin. A boy in the crowd, one who had once shared a desk with Elijah at school, snuck away and carved something into the bark of the sycamore with a pocket knife that night. EC 1912. No one saw him do it. No one mentioned it later. But the mark remained, quiet, waiting. Weeks passed. The photograph made its rounds. It showed up in mailboxes wrapped in brown paper. It was passed across bar counters, whispered over sewing circles, pinned on walls. It became a trophy, a message, a warning. And still, no one spoke Elijah's name again. But in the northern cities, whispers began. Someone at the NAACP got hold of the photo. A young black reporter in Chicago wrote a scathing piece. A boy hung for a pie, the face of Southern justice. It didn't make the front page, but it was a start. And somewhere, beneath a rustling sycamore in a town that had forgotten how to feel shame, a name carved into bark waited. Waited for someone to ask the question. Waited for someone to say, who was Elijah Carter? The days after Elijah's lynching stretched on like a fever dream, hot, blurred, and wrong. The town returned to its rhythm like nothing had happened. Wagons still rolled down Main Street. The bakery reopened with fresh pies stacked neatly behind the window. The general store put up a sign advertising a sale on flour. Sunday church bells rang with an almost cruel punctuality. People nodded good morning, children played in the fields again. But something had shifted subtly, dangerously. Not because they felt guilt, because they had rewritten the truth. Elijah Carter wasn't a boy anymore. In the town's memory, he had become something else entirely. A warning, a lesson, a name to be whispered only when telling other black children how to survive. You best not act like that, Carter boy, they said. Look where it got him. Sarah Carter heard them, every word. She hadn't left her house since that night. The front door stayed shut, the curtains drawn. Her job with the Larkins vanished without a word, just a note on her doorstep. We've decided to find someone more suitable. Her friends, what few she had stopped coming. Some out of fear, others because silence was easier. Even the preacher from Mount Olive Baptist never came to pray with her. Though she saw him walking by, eyes fixed on the road, like he didn't know her anymore, there was no funeral, no obituary, no grave marker, just a patch of hard earth at the edge of a segregated cemetery where weeds grew faster than grass. Sarah visited it once, only once. She stood in the heat, hands trembling, a single sheet of paper clutched to her chest, Elijah's last drawing. The blue jay in chains. She knelt down, pressed it to the soil, and whispered, "You still fly, baby." They didn't take that. Then she left. She never went back. At school, Elijah's desk remained empty for 2 days. Then, without announcement, it was filled by another boy, white, freckled, with a new set of books. The teacher never said Elijah's name again. It was erased from the roll call, from the school records, from the year's photo. When a younger student asked what happened to him, the teacher just tightened her jaw and said, "Some boys don't learn." The rest of the class nodded. None of them wanted to be those boys. In the black section of town, no one dared say what they really felt. Not out loud. At dinner tables, behind closed doors, they whispered, "He was just a child. They took him like a dog, they gonna do it again." But in public, they kept their heads down lower, walked faster, laughed less. The message had landed, and it was loud. Sheriff Dugan never filed a report. There was no investigation, no inquiry, no charges. He didn't need to explain himself. He just tipped his hat, sat on his porch in the evenings with a glass of whiskey, and waited for the next reason to keep order. The photograph of Elijah hung in the back of the barbershop for a few weeks. Someone pinned it there like a trophy. Eventually, a boy ripped it down and burned it behind the building. No one asked who, no one cared. But even ash can leave stains. A month later, a letter arrived at Sarah Carter's house. No return address, just a Chicago postmark. Inside was a newspaper clipping. A boy hung for a pie. The face of Southern justice. Beneath the headline was a smaller line. The NAACP is investigating lynchings across the South. Sarah held the paper in her lap for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stared at Elijah's name, printed, official, real, and whispered, "They said your name, baby." Somebody finally said your name, but the town didn't like being looked at. Soon, whispers turned into warnings. She's talking to outsiders. She's stirring up trouble. She'll bring the wrong kind of attention. One night, a brick crashed through Sarah's front window. Wrapped around it was a note, "We can do it again." She didn't scream. She just swept up the glass. The next morning, she boarded a train heading north. No one saw her off. No one asked where she was going. No one missed her. Years passed. The town grew. Paved roads replaced dirt. A few new shops opened. One of them even hired a black cashier. Progress, they said. But the tree in the town square remained. So did the silence. Every February, schools taught American history, but skipped certain years. Teachers mentioned presidents and wars, but never boys like Elijah. The photo disappeared, the stories faded, and the sycamore became just a tree again. Except for the initials carved in the bark. C. 1912. Most people ignored them. Some claimed they didn't know who it meant, but very few paused when they passed that tree, just for a second, and wondered. In 1960, during a wave of civil rights protests, a student reporter visited the town. She'd been digging through old NAACP records and stumbled across a forgotten name. Elijah Carter. She asked around. Most shrugged. Some denied ever hearing it. But one old man, a former classmate, lowered his eyes and said, "He liked to draw birds." She wrote down everything he said, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, Elijah's name made the front page of a paper. Not everyone forgot, but many chose to, because remembering required reckoning, and reckoning is never easy. Autumn swept across the Midwest with its usual quiet beauty, amber leaves skipping across sidewalks, college campuses buzzing with fresh notebooks and caffeine. And in a quiet corner of a university library in Chicago, a name was about to be resurrected. Nina Clark was a sophomore journalism, major sharp-eyed, whip-smart, and always 2 questions deeper than anyone else in the room. She was working on a semester-long feature titled Echoes of the Unnamed, Forgotten Victims of American Lynchings. What began as an academic assignment had quickly evolved into something else entirely. Obsession, responsibility. Most of her classmates picked high-profile cases, Emmett Till, Sam Hose, Mary Turner. But Nina wanted a name no one knew. "I don't want a martyr," she'd told her professor. "I want a ghost." So she dove into the archive's dusty NAACP records. Telegrams, typewritten letters sent in shaky hands. She flipped through yellowing pages of the Chicago Defender, looking for names that barely made a whisper when they passed through history. That's when she found it. Elijah Carter, age unknown, lynched in Mississippi, 1912. No photograph, no case number. Just a single entry in a worn spreadsheet, typed in faint ink. And beneath that, alleged theft of bakery item. No trial, no burial recorded. Nina blinked. Reread the line, then wrote his name in all capital letters on a sticky note and stuck it on her dorm wall. From that moment on, Elijah wasn't just a boy in a file. He was her responsibility. Weeks passed. Nina gathered what little there was, tiny breadcrumbs in a country built to forget. She found a scan of the 1912 newspaper article from Chicago, "A boy hung for a pie, buried in a microfilm reel." It included a grainy description of the town. Population 1,800, mostly white, known for cotton and tobacco. But the name had been redacted in later archives, likely to preserve reputations. Nina wasn't interested in reputations. She was after truth. So she started cross-referencing regional census data, church registries, old maps, land ownership records. Hours turned into nights. Coffee into cold pizza. Dead ends into detours. Then, finally, she found a school record from 1911. Carter, Elijah, age 12, colored. Attended class until July 10. Her heart jumped. That date matched the report. She had him. And the town? A forgotten dot in Wilkinson County, Mississippi. The same place where voter records went missing for decades. Where nothing ever happened, until someone asked the right question. Nina packed her camera, her recorder, her notes, and boarded a Greyhound south. The town hadn't changed much. Still one main road. Still a bakery, now called Wilkes Cafe, serving sweet tea and cobbler under a faded awning. The general store was now a dollar mart, but the tree, the sycamore, still stood in the center of town. And so did the silence. Nina walked into the local library, introduced herself politely. The librarian, an elderly woman with tight curls and tight lips, squinted at her notes. "Elijah Carter?" she said, drawing out the name like it tasted bitter. "Don't ring a bell." Nina tried again at the county clerk's office. "Records from that far back aren't digitalized," the man at the desk said, not meeting her eyes. "And some were lost in a fire." "Of course they were," Nina muttered. She walked the town for hours, taking photos, capturing sounds, old porch swings, cicadas humming like static, wind brushing through dead grass. And then, as the sun dipped low, she saw it. EC 1912, carved into the bark of the sycamore, weather-worn, faded, but real. She touched it gently, as if it might disappear, closed her eyes, took a breath. He was real. She whispered his name, Elijah, and the wind moved through the leaves like a breath held too long, finally released. The next day, she found him again in the unmarked section of the Black Cemetery, just outside town. A retired pastor, Reverend Amos Tate, had agreed to meet her there. He was in his 80s, sharp as a blade dulled only by time. "Elijah Carter," he said, standing at a patch of uneven ground. "He was before my time, but my daddy, he saw it." Nina waited, recorder in hand. "They took him at night," Reverend Tate said. "Said he stole a pie. Said it like that made him worth less than a dog. My daddy said the town watched it happen, then pretended it didn't. That's the worst part. Not the rope, not the tree, the pretending." Nina felt her throat tighten. "I'm going to write about him," she said. "Really write, not just a footnote." The Reverend nodded. "Make em see him." She returned to Chicago with pages of notes, old photos, taped interviews, and a conviction so deep it felt like fire. She wrote for weeks. She told the story from the beginning, the drawings, the accusation, the midnight knock, the public lynching, the silence that followed. She printed Elijah's name in bold again and again until it felt permanent. The article ran in the student newspaper first, then was picked up by a national Black history publication online. The Boy Who Drew Birds, Remembering Elijah Carter, 1912. Within a week, it had been shared over 80,000 times. A historian reached out, then a filmmaker, then a civil rights foundation offering to fund a proper headstone. For the first time in over a century, Elijah Carter was being remembered. His name, once erased, now echoed across timelines, classrooms, courtrooms. Nina visited his grave one last time that year. She placed a single drawing on the soil, a bird in full flight, wings spread wide, no chains in sight. "You still fly," she whispered. "They didn't take that." And the wind, ever faithful, stirred the leaves like a quiet applause. The train ride back to Chicago was quiet, except for the rhythmic clatter of steel on steel and the soft hum of Nina's headphones playing an old gospel tune her grandmother used to sing. She had Elijah's story in her bag, typed, backed up, printed twice. But more than that, she had something intangible, something weighty, a sense that the past, though buried deep and silenced long, still reached up through the soil, refusing to die. She stared out the window, watching pine trees flicker past like ghosts. What does it mean to remember someone the world tried so hard to forget? That question sat with her like a second heartbeat. A month after her article was published, a small ceremony was held at Elijah Carter's grave. It wasn't a grand affair. There were no politicians, no press vans, no booming microphones. Just a group of strangers who read his story online. Some drove in from neighboring towns. Others flew in from as far as DC and Oakland. They brought flowers, framed prints of his drawing, and folded letters. Sarah Carter, of course, had long passed. No known family remained. But in that moment, standing under an overcast sky, near a freshly placed headstone, Elijah had people. The headstone was simple. Elijah Carter, 1900-1912, he drew birds. They feared his flight. A woman read aloud from Nina's article. Someone else sang quietly, "I'll fly away," the words floating up into the trees like smoke. A child, no older than Elijah had been, placed a drawing beside the grave, a bird soaring toward the sun, no chains, no shadows. Then came silence. But it was not the silence of fear, it was reverence. Nina stood off to the side, hands in her coat pockets, eyes glassy. She hadn't expected it to matter this much. She hadn't expected it to hurt to love someone she had never met, to ache for a boy who lived a century before her birth. But it did. And it would always. A man approached her quietly tall, black, maybe in his 40s, with a voice as gentle as snowfall. "You the one wrote that piece?" She nodded. He smiled. "My granddaddy was lynched in Alabama. We never got a name, never got justice. But this, what you did for Elijah, it gives the rest of us hope." She didn't know what to say, so she just said, "I'm sorry." He put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't be. You remembered. That's more than most." Later that night, back in her dorm, Nina opened her laptop and pulled up the folder labeled EC. It had grown dozens of subfolders, notes, timelines, voice recordings, census documents, the kind of archive someone once told her would never matter. And yet here she was, watching it ripple outward. Teachers writing to her, asking to include the article in their Black History Month curriculum. A podcast producer asking for an interview. A small Mississippi museum reaching out for materials on the town that once tried to erase Elijah's name. She scrolled through the photos one more time, stopping at the one of the initials carved into the sycamore. EC 1912. Someone had once used a pocket knife and a trembling hand to etch truth into bark. And now the world was listening. But even amidst the hope, there was a quiet ache. Nina knew Elijah's story wasn't rare. He was one of thousands. Children, fathers, sisters, neighbors, all taken in the name of fear disguised as justice, all buried in silence. And worse, some were still being taken. Different towns, different methods, but the same playbook. So as she prepared to submit the story for award consideration, her professors insisted Nina paused at the author bio section. She deleted the standard line. Instead, she typed, "This story is for the ones who never got to speak, and for those who are still being silenced." Weeks later, on a cool April morning, Nina returned to the sycamore tree. She brought with her a group of high school students from a nearby town, mostly black, mostly curious, mostly quiet. She told them Elijah's story in full. She didn't flinch. She didn't soften the truth. And when she finished, she looked them in the eye and asked, "How many Elijahs do you think never got a headstone? Never got a name?" The students didn't answer at first. Then one girl raised her hand and said, "Too many." Another boy said, "Still happening." A third whispered, "We gotta tell them too." Nina nodded. That's the thing about silence. It only wins if we let it. Before they left, one student walked up to the tree and traced the initials in the bark with their fingers. Then they pulled a small pocket knife from their jacket and etched 2 more letters underneath. NC and Nina stared in surprise. The student shrugged. "So they know someone came back." She smiled. "Not everything dies." Epilogue. A final note to the reader. If you've made it this far, you've done something powerful. You remembered. And in doing so, you've defied what this world often asks us to do: forget, move on, let it go. But we cannot heal what we refuse to face. We cannot rebuild on top of rot. We cannot look forward if we won't first look back. Elijah Carter was not a headline, not just a statistic. He was a child who drew birds, who believed the sky was big enough for him. This story is not about the rope. It's about the wings they tried to cut and the flight that still lives on. So now, the question is yours to carry. Who else is waiting to be remembered? And what will you do about it? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Drop a number 1 in the comments if you believe Elijah Carter and every forgotten soul like him deserves to be remembered. Let's flood this video with the number 1 to say we will not stay silent. Because here's the truth. Silence is complicity. And every time we choose to speak their names, we chip away at the systems that tried to erase them. The lesson? Justice delayed is justice denied. But remembrance, real remembrance, is resistance. Elijah's wings were clipped, but through us, his story can still fly. Let's make sure it never falls back into the shadows again.